Hi, everyone. Welcome to the first virtual high school marine science symposium. And today's panel is focused on See Yourself in STEM. My name is Torrance Hanley. My pronouns are she, her, and I am a research scientist at the Northeastern University Marine Science Center. And then I also have another hat outside of academia where I also work for Mass Bay's National Estuary Partnership. So I'm the regional coordinator for Metro Boston, and that means that I work with 13 cities and towns around Boston that many of you may live in to identify priorities for their coastal habitats. But today, the goal is for you to get to know these three wonderful people who are here on our panel today. And I can tell you from personal experience working with them and doing research with them and teaching them in class that they are all outstanding scientists and just outstanding people. And I'm really excited to be here today for you to have a chance to get to know them and learn about what they do and how they got to be where they are today. And so with that, I wanted to kick off our session by giving each of our panelists a chance to introduce themselves. So I'm going to have them say their names and their pronouns, tell you a little bit about their career stage or their position, give you an idea of what they're currently studying. They're all doing really cool work right now. And then ask them to share their favorite marine species, just so you can learn a little bit about what we're all interested in. So I'm going to start by passing it off to Mark Losavio.
Hi, my name is Mark Losavio. My pronouns are he, him. I am currently and brand new media and outreach coordinator for the Monitor National Marine Sanctuary, which is down in North Carolina. And what I study right now, that's kind of a complicated question because I don't really necessarily study anything, but the Monitor Marine Sanctuary is kind of focused on the historical preservation and protection of the USS Monitor, the first American ironclad. And my favorite animal, right? Well, that's never, ever an easy answer to give. And it changes day by day. But right now, I'm going to go with the Puget Sound king crab because they're gigantic and cuddly and really just amazing all around.
Excellent. Thank you, Mark. I don't know how many people describe crabs as cuddly, but I appreciate your appreciation of the crabs.
Not enough people.
Mark is the ultimate crab advocate. All right, next, I'm going to pass it over to Allison Noble.
So I'm Allison. I use she, her pronouns. I am an undergraduate student at Northeastern University. I'm currently a senior. And I study kind of two things at the moment. I'm working with a lab that does bioacoustic research on coral reefs. And I'm also working with another lab that does community ecology, mostly dealing with oyster reefs. Favorite organism, right? Okay. Over my undergraduate career, I've started getting really into the oyster reef system, spent a lot of time looking at oysters, so I'm pretty fond of them at this point, despite the fact that they, look like rocks, but that's fine. But I'll always have a soft spot for dolphins of all sorts.
Awesome. Thank you, Allison. Allison has spent so many hours with oysters, so it's really a testament that she still loves oysters, and she's a trooper. Next, I would like to introduce Sarit Truskey.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me okay? I have some masks on. I'm Sarit. I use she, her pronouns. And I am currently a PhD student at Northeastern based out of the Marine Lab in Nahant. And I study a few different things, but my focus is on coastal restoration and integrating some basic science into for restoration. And I specifically work on genetic diversity and trying to understand how the identities of oysters, so I work on oyster restoration, and the diversity of those oysters that we use to build reefs matters for restoration outcomes. And I'm happy to talk more about that later if of interest. But favorite marine organism is a bit of a tough one, actually. But so before this, I worked at the Smithsonian on deep open ocean animals, and I got to see some really incredible things. And I think my favorite is actually a stage of an animal. So Phylosoma larvae are lobster larvae, and they ride jellyfish. And I can post something to the chat if I'm able to, if anyone wants to see a photo.
Awesome. Well, maybe while Sarit does that, I will move on to our next question. And I also have to say that I personally was not a huge fan of marine worms until I met Sarit, and then Sarit has shown me pictures that have made me realize that marine worms can be beautiful. So that's a testament as well. And so you just got to hear from everyone about where they are right now. And so I'd like for our panelists to think back maybe 5 years ago and ask yourselves, did you think this is what you would be doing or studying when you were 5 years younger than today? And I'll let you kind of take turns jumping in. Some of you may immediately have an answer and some may need a little bit of time. So whoever wants to go first, please jump in.
So 5 years ago would be 2016, right? All right, so I was in South Carolina and I was working in an ecotoxicology lab for the School of Public Health at the University of South Carolina. And I did not have any idea what I would be doing, just because I had been applying to grad schools and getting rejected from most of them. And I applied to grad schools from the years of 2014 to the end of 2017 before I finally got in somewhere. But I just wanted to do research on sharks mainly. So I definitely diverged from that path, and now I'm doing more of an outreach communication kind of focus.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. And it is oh so common to go through many stages of rejection and frustration, but I can speak from personal experience, Mark, that we are really glad that you persevered and that you're still in this field. So thank you.
Me too.
Next.
I can hop in. So 5 years ago, I think I was working on like the scallop fishery. So I was going out on some fishing vessels and working on like open ocean systems. And at that point, I learned that I get super seasick. So I kind of had like a trouble figuring out, like, is this something that I can do? And at the time, I wasn't really looking that close to shore. So I didn't really know that this kind of research, specifically like integrating some of the genetics, was even happening. But I knew I wanted to get closer to shore. So on that point, I guess the idea of what I'm studying now was at least closer to shore. It makes sense for me now.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing. I think it's always so interesting to see what we were really excited about in studying several years ago and how we ended up where we are today. Allison, would you like to share?
Yeah, 5 years ago, I was a high school senior. So I was just about to start college, and I did go in as a declared marine bio major. But what I was really interested in looking at was dolphin communications specifically. And I feel like it's kind of a common thing in marine bio. Everyone goes in because you want to play with dolphins, and then you wind up studying something completely different. And that's not a bad thing ever. So did I think that oyster reefs were where I was going to wind up? No, but, and I did still kind of wind up doing the bioacoustics thing. So mix of both, I guess.
Awesome. Thanks, Allison. Well, the oyster reefs also are very glad that you got sucked into oyster reef research. And I'm excited you made a really good point that you're still getting to do bioacoustics, just on maybe a different system than you thought you were going to. So that's a really good example too. So now I'm going to take you back even a little bit farther and ask, how did you get into either the field of STEM generally or marine science? And so this is a chance to discuss whether you always knew that you wanted to go into this field, or just share something about kind of how you got here.
I can start on this one. So I feel like starting from when I was little, I always had an inclination towards like the sciences, and I really loved being outside. And my mom was also, she works on climate change, but more from the policy side. But I felt like I had a good role model who was a woman and who, of course, looked like me. And that really helped me see a lot of the possibilities in STEM, and I was excited about it. I didn't come to know I wanted to do marine things until a bit later. I actually thought I was going to do rivers for a long time, and then it just so happened that opportunities opened up in the marine side, and I was excited about them. But yeah, that's a bit about my path.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing. And Sarit and I actually share a similar path in that my mom is also in science and also was very influential in my decision to pursue science. So it's funny sometimes when you can keep it in the family. Mark or Allison?
I can go. Kind of like Sarit, I kind of always wanted to be a scientist. And then it was actually a trip to the New England Aquarium when I was like 7 that I first heard the term marine biologist, and I was like, yeah, that's what I want to do. And then basically didn't shut up about it for the next 15 years. So I've been pretty lucky in that regard, but I know in high school there were definitely a couple moments where I was like, do I really want to do this? But just getting some more experience in this field really helped me kind of cement, like, yeah, this is where I want to be.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that, Allison. And we're going to come back to that a little bit later, where sometimes you have sort of this formative moment where you're like, oh, I really like that. But then you're like, oh, do I really want to do that? And so talking about getting experience, we're going to come back to that idea. But I think that's a really important point to bring up. So thanks for sharing that. Mark?
Yeah, it's interesting that you guys both brought up your mothers, because both of my parents actually have absolutely nothing to do with any kind of science stuff at all. Like my mom still has trouble like determining the difference between dolphins and sharks, which I guess is really more my fault than anything. Um, but and so I kind of wanted to be like a doctor for the longest time. And in high school, I like signed up to be a student athletic trainer. But for whatever reason, I don't know why she did this. My mom bought me a saltwater fish tank for Christmas, like my freshman year. And I don't know what happened, but I was just like obsessed. Like I sat there and watched the empty tank blow sand around for like a month before I got fish. And because if any of you guys have the fish tank, it's expensive, right? It's not a cheap like hobby. So as soon as I was old enough to work, I got a job at the pet store that I bought my fish from to get that like 45% discount. But that required me to be able to like teach other people how to keep and raise their saltwater fish, which required me to learn how to do that. So I kind of had to learn a lot about aquarium husbandry and a little bit of the chemistry, the nitrogen cycle, and then to teach that to other people. And so that was kind of how I got into marine biology and into science communication.
That's such a cool story, Mark. Thank you for sharing that. That's awesome. Also, I'm coming to you for fish tank advice because keeping a good fish tank, particularly a saltwater fish tank, is not easy to do. So I appreciate that skill. All right. I will, again, I'm going to continue on in my next. You're getting some good comments in the chat. Someone said their fish died. So they're going to need your advice, Mark.
It happens. It does.
It
happens
happens
a lot.
Yes. All right, well, again, if you have any other questions, either about rearing fish in your homes or about any of the things that have come up, please toss them into the chat. But for now, I will keep going on so we can learn more fun facts about these folks. So now the fun part. What is your favorite part about being a marine scientist?
I'll start this one. My favorite part about being a marine scientist is like the going to cool places and seeing things that like people don't normally ever get to see. Like at North, like even just going to the campus and in Nahant, you get to see the angle of Boston that not a lot of people in the city ever get to see, um, or not a lot of people dive in the waters off of this city. Like that's an area that few people go to, but like millions of people have lived in this area, like at any one time. So I just think it's really cool that we get to see like parts of the planet that not a lot of people get to experience.
That is a great example. And Mark, would you be willing to share a little bit about some of the cool places that you've been as a result of being a marine scientist?
Yeah, well, a part of the 3Cs program from Northeastern that I was a part of is you get to travel to Panama to do research on the coral reefs in the Caribbean and in the Eastern Tropical Pacific. And then you also get to go to the Pacific Northwest to study the super cold, but really cool waters up there. But I've also got to do some research in China and got to see some really cool and like classified areas. It's really, it took a lot of pictures, which I probably shouldn't have, but it's okay. It's really cool, the cool places we get to see and go to. I also did some research in Africa too. There's a long list. It's all coming back to me one by one.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for sharing. And to those of you who have never gotten to come out to Nahant, hopefully one day when this pandemic is over, there are lots of opportunities to come out to the Marine Science Center through the great programs that the outreach program runs. So definitely reach out and be on the lookout because we love to take people out here and show off the amazing systems that we have literally in our backyard. Allison or Sarit, want to share your favorite parts about being marine scientists?
I will very much second what Mark said because I was also on 3Cs, and every time I tell my parents about like what research I'm doing or the things I'm doing for classes, they're like, "Can we come out and, just like help you out?" It's like maybe. But yeah, we get to see some of the coolest ecosystems on the planet that not everyone does get to see. And you also get to do such cool collaborations as a marine scientist. Like it's such an interdisciplinary field. I've gotten to hear talks and learn from people that it's just like, wow, what you do is amazing. And it's just really fun to hear about.
Yeah, awesome. Allison, thank you for sharing that point about one of the great things about where we all work or have worked is that people are doing really different things and have really different focuses. So even if maybe you're not as excited about, say, the marine science ecology side of things, but you're really interested in the human side of things, there are people here who are thinking about how humans interact with those coastal systems. And you can just ask all kinds of questions, which is one of the cool parts about this group and just marine science in general. Sarit?
I think one of my favorite parts, and this applies to, I think, science and research in general, is getting to basically work on like puzzles, like figuring out pieces of a puzzle and asking questions, like you said, Tori. And I get to do that for like my job, like figure things out basically, and that can be really fun. And I will third the getting to go to cool places as a marine scientist, and getting to spend time by the water. I think the coolest place that I've been for work was, again, when I was working at the Smithsonian. We were studying this cave system down in Turks and Caicos, or it's inland caves on the island, but they're connected underground to the ocean still. And they were just, I had never seen systems like that. And it was really neat that we were like inland, but still working on like marine critters. And yeah, so that's my favorite part.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing. And I think one sort of puzzle that maybe folks don't realize when you enter this field is that a good part of your time is spent going to someplace like Home Depot or Lowe's and trying to figure out how to build something that can be used in the field in saltwater. And no one has any idea what you're talking about. And it is quite a puzzle to figure out how to set up some sort of experiment in the field using things that are really not designed to do that. So that is another type of puzzle. So yeah, I like that point that you made, Sarit. Thank you. All right. Well, so now we've talked about kind of our favorite things about being marine scientists, but we know that no career, no field is perfect. And so I'd love for folks to share one of the most challenging things about studying marine science or doing research and working in this field. So what are some challenges that you faced?
Kind of related to what Sarit said in the last question. It's like, yes, science is definitely a puzzle and it's really fun to solve it. But like sometimes I feel like people have this idea of like science is, oh, you do an experiment and then you get all these nice, neat results and then you come to a conclusion. But science is messy and sometimes your results can be hard to interpret and figure out. But that's also one of the good parts about marine science. It's just everything's really complex. And that's what makes it challenging and fun.
Thank you for sharing that, Allison. I think that's a really important point. I feel like what we learn in sort of textbooks and even in the classroom is that there's like an answer. And in many times when we do our experiments, there's not necessarily a clear answer, but you raised the good point that it means more questions and that you get to keep asking questions and trying to find new answers. So thank you so much for sharing that. Mark or Sarit?
I can jump in. And so what I was thinking about was pretty similar to Allison. There is a lot of failure involved in science, especially in experimental science. And as somewhat of a perfectionist and someone who gets a bit hung up on mistakes, acknowledging that like those things happen. And sometimes, especially for experiments, like you can't really do anything about it. Like a storm might come through, like all of your oysters might be eaten by crabs. And it's kind of about how you pivot from there. Like, what are you going to do with that failure? Like, you have to learn from it, accept it, and kind of keep going. But I'd say, and that's like a good message for life in general, but that's always been something that I've struggled a little bit with. And as a scientist, it's something that I'm still working on. So building that skill.
Thank you for sharing that, Sarit. And I think that that is something that many scientists struggle with. And I think it's a really important point to bring up. So thanks for sharing that. Mark?
Yeah, I kind of touched on this earlier, and it does kind of relate. And I don't want to hound on the same theme, but it like at least for me, I have been like rejected like a lot of times from a lot of different institutions, a lot of different jobs, a lot of different professors, and it's okay because I was able to keep trying. I was able to get some really cool opportunities because of these rejections, and now I kind of have like my dream job. But it does suck a lot to get rejection after rejection, or to just hear absolutely nothing back. It's even worse. And it can be demoralizing sometimes because you feel like maybe I'm not cut out for this. Like maybe I'm not good enough to be a marine biologist or marine scientist. Like maybe I should just go to something else. But I'm not going to guarantee anything. But if you stick through it, you could get lucky like me, or someone could find your worth and be like, this is the person who I need for the job or the lab or the class.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. I think that's such an important point. And I know that everyone that's here has dealt with rejection. in some cases, many of us, many of rejections. But as I said earlier, like I am personally so glad that Mark has persevered and that he's here, because he's really a wonderful addition to marine science and science communication. And the same is true for Allison and Sarit. And so I think one thing that we try to do in the lab groups that I'm involved in are celebrate all the little successes, because there's plenty of no's and there's plenty of rejection, but so take time to kind of recognize the little steps, which I know maybe sounds hokey, but once you get in it and you're bombarded with some no's, it's good to celebrate everyone's success and take time to recognize that. And so I have a great question in the chat that I want to, this kind of follows up on this, and I'm going to let you all take this in whatever direction you want to go, because I think there's a lot of ways you could answer this. So the question was, how hard was it for you in the beginning of everything? And so you can talk about the beginning of whichever stage you want to focus on. But yeah, just taking a time to reflect like how hard it was to get started.
I can touch on this first. I think this is a really good question. And I'm going to go back to when I was in college, because I mentioned always being interested in science. That doesn't mean I necessarily knew what to do to like get there and become a scientist. So actually in college, I didn't know that like research experiences were necessarily something that like if you wanted to go on to grad school in the sciences, you should maybe be like looking for. So I kind of came up towards the end. I was also playing basketball and very much immersed in that. And I was like, I enjoy science, but like basketball player was my identity. So then at the end, I was kind of frantic and I was like, oh no, I messed up. And my take on that was basically immediately afterwards, after I graduated from college, I took like 3 jobs, one of which was paying, and one of them was a science educator. One of them was volunteering at a research lab where I was basically just like sterilizing equipment. And then the third was working in a marine science museum, like working on the tanks. And I did that because at that point I wasn't really sure what avenue I wanted to do. So, and I did that for like probably 6 months. And that opportunity to just explore really helped me refine my path. I wouldn't recommend working 3 jobs, especially when only one of them is paying you. But I would recommend taking time to explore your interests and not be afraid to do so.
Awesome. Thank you, Sarit. And I think you also highlight a really important point. Like there are some people who know exactly what they want to do and have a clear vision. And there are plenty of people who don't know exactly what they want to do, and their paths go many different ways. And so there's definitely value in exploring different options. So thanks for sharing that experience. Mark or Allison?
Yeah, I'm just gonna go back to like the beginning of my undergrad experience. And like to be honest, I spent the first couple months of undergrad just feeling completely lost, like on the level of like, it's not that I don't know certain information, it's I don't know that I should be knowing certain information or something. And like I had gone into it with just this very clear idea of like, I want to go study dolphin communication, and then you actually get into college and there's so many opportunities, but also I was just struggling with finding like structure and a way to progress forward. And one of the things I did struggle with was finding ways to get involved in research, since I had the feeling that was where I wanted to go, just because of the setup of not having the room in my schedule to get out to the Marine Science Center on a regular basis. So I actually wound up working in the linguistics lab for about a year and a half before actually getting involved in marine research. And that was really cool and really valuable. So sometimes you just have to take slightly unconventional steps to get where you want to be.
Thank you for sharing that, Allison. And I think that's a really common experience, that suddenly you come to this new place and you have this feeling that there are things you're supposed to be doing and taking advantage of, but it's hard to know what they are because there's just so many things coming at you at once. And yeah, so thank you for sharing that experience. Mark?
Yeah, first I just want to let y'all know, I think my neighbors have suddenly decided to renovate their apartment next door, so heads up. But yeah, at the start of my undergrad, I had like not really any clue what I wanted to do. Like, I really could just identify a whole bunch of random tropical fish, and that was like the extent of my knowledge. And I know a whole bunch of my classmates, they had like marine biology classes in high school, or they went to marine biology camps, and they all had this knowledge. I was just starting from the bottom, and I really was just along for the ride. Like, I knew I really loved it, and I was gonna go with it for a long time, but I was just kind of taking classes. I liked it. I joined the little marine science undergraduate club. I really liked it, and I just kind of did whatever came along my hands because I was like, whatever, I'll try it. I did join some random labs, a fish lab, a butterfly lab, uh, just because they were looking for people, and I thought, hey, whatever, I'm not doing anything on my Friday nights. Um, and that kind of lucked out for me because when I graduated, all I had in my mind was just this vague notion that I needed to go to grad school because that was the path that you took. Just graduate, go to grad school. I was applying to grad schools and I didn't get in. And I got lucky because one of the other students in the club that I had joined just left their job, and she recommended me for her job at the ecotoxicology lab. And that's how I got that. And I just kind of sat in that job and kept applying until I learned that I came upon the realization that I wanted to communicate science. I wanted to learn how people learned about marine science and marine biology. And that's what brought me to the 3Cs program.
Awesome. Thank you all for sharing your paths and sort of the challenges that you hit upon the way and how they ultimately kind of led you to where you are today. I think that's really valuable to reflect on. So thank you. And so thanks for the great question. Again, if anyone has any other questions, please toss them in the chat. But for now, I will move into my next set of questions. So I wanted to give everyone kind of a general idea of what marine science actually looks like. And so I'm going to ask a series of questions. And so the first one is, what does a typical day look like for you during the summer? And then, so I'll let everyone answer that. And then the next question will be, what does a typical day look like for you during the school year? Just to give everyone a chance to kind of see what a typical day for each of these different marine scientists looks like. So let's start with a typical day in the summertime.
So I just started this job last month, so I can't really tell you that. But I will tell you, I spent a lot of my career in outreach positions. And so a lot of my summertime work involved me taking students out, or adults or any strangers out to some nearby ocean system. And I've done this in a bunch of different cities, so whichever one is closest or most convenient, and just teaching them about the animals that they can find in their community. During the school year, I've done a whole bunch of different jobs. Like, it should be clear, I've done a whole bunch of different jobs. So this is kind of hard to answer. But I guess, I guess when I did my AmeriCorps year in New London, I worked as a kind of like a teacher's assistant in the middle schools of New London School District. And then after that, I would take the students out and teach them about the ocean.
And can you just briefly describe what AmeriCorps is to folks who may not be familiar with that program?
Yeah, AmeriCorps is kind of like a year-long service-based contract where you commit yourself to an institution or a nonprofit organization to help better a community. It's kind of, I don't want to say it's volunteering because you do get paid like a tiny amount, like a very tiny amount. And then you work like built into the program is access to government food subsidies. Um, but it's I don't know if you ever heard of the Peace Corps. It's a lot like that. It's just a way that you can commit yourself to helping your nearby community. And then at the end of it, it comes with a lot of cool job training, experience, and an education award, which I used to go to Northeastern. And that experience taught me a lot of really useful skills that I still use now.
Awesome, thank you. And someone in the chat mentioned that they were also going to do AmeriCorps, so it's exciting to hear about your experience doing that. And I have one more follow-up question for Mark, and then I'll pass it over to Allison and Sarit. Can you talk a little bit, so you've done a lot of different things for outreach. Can you just talk a little bit like what maybe one typical day for outreach would look like for you? What are you actually doing?
So one typical day for outreach, and this is going to be kind of general, but you're usually waking up pretty early, especially if you're working with a school group. And sometimes it involves traveling. If that involves traveling, that usually means you're taking a set of animals and or like items to a school to talk about these animals. Are usually touch tank animals like sea urchins or sea stars, maybe a fish if you're lucky, and just explaining them these are the animals that are in your community. This is how we can help them. This is how we can study them, something like that. Or you can set up for people to come to your area, your space, like to the Marine Science Center. And what they do there is they will take you on a tour of the campus, give you some information about the research that goes on at the facility, teach you about a particular lesson that they have in mind. It's usually like the intertidal ecosystem. And then maybe take you out on the rocks and help you collect animals and study them. It's actually a lot of fun. It's a lot of outdoors times. It's a lot of sun. So when I get older, my skin is not going to look great. We'll be honest. But I still love it. I still love it. I love being outdoors, and it's great. It's good exercise too.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing a little bit more about what outreach can actually involve, because I think it's really helpful to hear that. Allison and Sarit, want to share a little bit about your typical days?
I can jump in. So I guess in the summer tends to be like field season for a lot of field scientists, including myself. So for part of the summer, I go out and that's when I sample the oyster reefs that I work on. So that's time on a boat with other scientists, getting in the water, pulling up oysters, sampling them, and all of the little critters that live amongst them. And that's pretty fun. And I also tend to spend a lot of time in the lab. So like I'm doing today. I was doing some lab work this morning before the panel. And then otherwise, I am very much behind my computer, like working on what I come up with in the lab and processing it and writing it up. And then during the school year, one more thing that I do. So for my PhD, I'm paid through a combination of like teaching assistantship where I will be teaching in the classroom. So in the fall, that's when I typically am teaching undergraduates and helping my advisor lecture and also come up with some materials. So that's another thing that I do as a grad student during the year.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing sort of the diversity of things that you can get to do as a grad student. And thanks also for highlighting, not everyone may know that when you go to get your PhD in a science field like biology or marine science, you are getting paid. So you're still going to school, but you're actually getting paid. And so that's one thing that many people don't know, and it is a definite perk. So I just wanted to highlight that. Allison?
For the last couple of summers, I've done a couple of different internships, which have, they've looked a little different in what a typical day is like. But the cool thing about summer internships is that they are during field season, so you do get to help out with a lot of the field work. So that might involve like a half day or a full day out in the field, followed by a couple pretty intense days of like sample processing before things start to fall apart. And then data entry, and then kind of rinse and repeat. Yeah, because that's just the time when you really want to get all those samples and all that field work done. And then school year is, as an undergraduate, mostly classes. Over the past couple semesters, I've always tried to find a way to get into the lab at least once a week, whether that's as like a part-time job or some sort of independent study course.
Awesome. Thank you all. And I just want to add that I was surprised no one said that field work usually involves getting very muddy. If you're doing oyster reefs or salt marshes in particular, you usually end up covered in mud from head to toe. There's some great pictures of Allison after doing field work in Florida on the oyster reefs. You sometimes sink into unexpected holes in the salt marsh, and then you wait for your friends to pull you out. Or you do diving. Mark has done awesome diving, and you get very, very salty and very wet. And if you're diving around here, sometimes you come up even in the summer and you are quite cold, but you get to see amazing things. So it's wet and dirty, but it's fun. So thanks for sharing your experiences and what the day kind of typically looks like. All right, so probably the question that many of you are waiting for, I want to ask our panelists, do you have any recommendations for high school students looking to get into the field of marine science? And I'll pose 2 questions and I can repeat these. In particular, if students are looking at colleges, are there certain courses or programs that they should look for? Or should high school students try to get research experiences? So we touched on this a little bit earlier. And if yes, any tips for finding opportunities to get involved? So again, just starting out with whether you all have any recommendations for high school students looking to get into the field of marine science.
So in terms of like looking for colleges with marine bio programs, definitely looking for somewhere that has a marine lab, like on the water, where you can actually get involved in hands-on research, and hopefully some sort of like experiential learning opportunity, whether that's like courses that are out at that lab, or like Northeastern has some sort of co-op / internship program that's kind of built into your school structure. And then like as a high school student, I know I got really lucky. One of my teachers actually earned her, like my bio teacher earned her degree in marine biology. So she was really interested in that stuff. She had a marine bio club. She ran this really awesome marine ecology trip out to Florida over spring break. And that was one of the experiences that I had that really helped me confirm that that was what I wanted to do. But I know that kind of thing isn't necessarily accessible to everyone. So even just like if you can get in contact with a professor or a scientist at a local university and maybe ask them some questions about being a marine scientist, or maybe even helping out with their lab once in a while, that can be a worthwhile path to go down.
Awesome. Thank you, Allison, for sharing those great suggestions. And you make a lot of really important points. And I'll just echo Allison's last point. The worst that someone can say if you email them is no, right? No one that we work with is going to be upset to get an email from a high school student who's really excited about science and what we do. So there's no harm in emailing and asking. Yeah, Mark?
And if you do get someone who is nasty to you, then they might not be worth working for anyways. But I did want to, I kind of wanted to build on Allison's point that when you're looking for a college, you don't necessarily, like a lot of people have it in their mind that they have to go to like the best top college. But it doesn't necessarily have to be like, I mean, you guys live in an area where you do have the best colleges like within walking distance. So that's good. But I went to the University of South Carolina, which, not a lot of people have heard of. And for some reason, they're the #1 business school in the nation. But they also have just a really good marine science program. Like a lot of the schools that have good marine biology programs are not schools that you necessarily like think of as like top colleges to go to, like Texas A&M or Florida State University. So don't do your own research on what school you want to go to. And yes, definitely make sure they have like access to water. Although you could probably find some really good schools in, inland. I'm sure the University of Miami in Ohio actually has a really good marine biology program. So it just depends on what you think is a good fit for you.
Thank you, Mark. That is such an important point, that you don't want to just look for schools based on name. Like look for schools that are doing what you think you're excited about doing. And even if they don't have a big name overall, they might have a really outstanding marine science program. And if that's what you're really jazzed about, then yeah, that's such a good point, Mark. Thank you. Sarit, did you want to chime in?
Yeah, so I went to a school without a marine biology program. So I wanted to talk a little bit about that. And my advice would just be there are so many things to think about for college. And when it comes to academics, like think about what you enjoy learning the most. And so it was a small liberal arts school. So I was taking like Spanish literature classes and art classes. And I think that really helped me think very broadly. And I wouldn't worry too much about limiting your opportunities by picking like a wrong focus, like as an undergrad, because no matter what you are learning, you're picking up like transferable skills like time management and writing skills and organizational skills. And that being said, I did have access to water. We had like seagrass beds and oyster reefs right off of our campus, and it was beautiful. But I just wanted to, if you are thinking about liberal arts or something, you can always like that's where I came from, and you can always like take that and pivot if marine science is something you really want to do.
Yeah, that is such a good point, Sarit. Thank you for bringing that up. And I will echo that. So I went to a school in upstate New York, which is solidly quite landlocked. And I actually didn't even start doing marine science until after graduate school. So I went to undergraduate, I went to graduate school, and then I started marine science as a postdoc. And now, years later, I identify as a marine scientist, but the skills I learned focusing on freshwater systems were absolutely transferable to marine science. So even if you choose a school that maybe doesn't have a marine science program, but down the line, you're like, this is really what I want to do, that door is not closed. So thanks for bringing that point up. All right, well, I have a couple more questions, and I just want to give a reminder to folks to please put questions in the chat so that you're not only listening to my questions. But the next thing that I want to ask folks is, what would you like to do next? And it's okay if you don't have an answer for that right now, especially if you just started a job. So it could be something like continue in your current position, go to graduate school, explore other fields of studies, consider other jobs. So I'd love to hear from folks what you're thinking about in terms of next steps.
So yeah, I'm probably going to stick with this job for at least a year or two. But I'm a very much fly by the seat of my pants kind of guy. If I encounter an opportunity down the road, I might just take it, see what happens. Why not? I'm not really have a set goal anymore. Like I have a job, I made it, that was my goal. So everything else is just like cake on top.
That's awesome. And again, I'm really happy for you, Mark. That's awesome. That's so nice to hear and so well deserved. Allison or Sarit?
Yeah, so I'm graduating this spring. So what do you want to do next is kind of the $1 million question here. I am kind of lucky in that I've been accepted into a +1 master's program here, so I'm just gonna kind of roll through onto that. But then my goal, my plan at the moment is to get a job probably as a lab technician, something where I'm still doing hands-on science to get a little more just life experience and maybe like publications under my belt, and then probably go and do more grad school. Yay.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that, Allison. And I'm sorry, I know that's like the worst question that you ask people in senior year. Like, no one wants to answer that question. And yeah, thank you for also sharing that you don't necessarily have to go straight from like undergrad to grad and just sort of stay in school forever, that there's a lot of value in getting experience as a technician and taking time to dig a little deeper and make sure like, is this really what I want to do before going on to grad school? So thanks for sharing that. Sarit?
And just to parrot what Tori just said, I did that for a number of years after graduating. So I always like recommend that track. As for next steps for me, they are a little fuzzy. I am pretty much in the middle of my PhD program. PhDs in this field generally take like 5, 6, 7 years, maybe 4 if you're like really fast. So I have a few more years in the program. Afterwards, not entirely sure, maybe looking at like postdoc positions in research labs. But yeah, I think being okay with that being fuzzy is something that I'm working on right now, but I'm excited to figure out those next steps.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing. And I can relate. There were many fuzzy stages during my career where pretty much every day I changed my mind about what I wanted to do next. Mark, did you want to jump in?
I also wanted to echo that I had like a 3 to 4 year gap between undergrad and grad school, like totally normal. A lot of people do just go right to grad school from undergrad, but I honestly think that I made a better grad student by building my skills and experience out.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, Mark. And I will be the counter. So I did go straight from undergrad to grad school, and I'll just share that I now advise people not to do that and to take a year and to get some experience. So not that you can't do it, but there really are a lot of benefits to that. So I just want to mention, Sierra shared in the chat. So Sierra Munoz, our wonderful outreach coordinator, shared that tomorrow night we have our monthly Science Cafe series, Thursday at 7 p.m. And it's really going to be a fascinating conversation on environmental justice, featuring 2 speakers from local groups in and around Boston. So I encourage you to join in if you happen to be available for that. And unless anyone else has any other questions, I will end by thanking our panelists for just a wonderful discussion. And I knew all these folks and I loved learning more about them and hearing about their experiences. So thank you, Mark, Allison, and Sarit, for giving your time and sharing your experiences.
Thank you so much for having us, Tori. It was awesome. It's cool.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for hosting.
Oh, no, this was easy. Thank you all for joining. I hope folks have a good day.